Okay, so we have a new Maamar, new week, a Maamar on this week. We usually do the Dvar Malchus, even though the truth is that this Maamar has appeared in the Dvar Malchus many times. And it's really a combination of a Maamar of the Alter Rebbe plus a Sikha that the Rebbe spoke about this Maamar. And they coalesced it, they put it together, they made it into one Maamar. So they gave like an introduction what the Rebbe spoke about it, and they gave like a conclusion what the Rebbe spoke about it. And the inside is like the actual Maamar that the Rebbe gave over from the Alter Rebbe. If you notice in the bottom of the page, there's an asterisk in the right before the footnote says Al Pila Kuti Sichas Chelik Hey Amud 332. Over there you could actually see it's a Sikha in Yiddish, and the Rebbe brings in the Maamar Alter Rebbe, and then he elaborates different things about it. Okay. Each Achas min Shebnei Anavim says in this week's Haftorah, it speaks about Elisha helping a woman who was suffering, and she owed a lot of money to the debtors, and she couldn't pay, and they were going to go ahead and take her children away for the debt and to be servants. And it was a whole miracle that he had a little bit of oil, and he asked her to get all the empty vessels, and they filled it and closed all the doors, no one should see, and every vessel was filled up with oil, and then she managed to sell that and not only be able to pay off her debts, but also live comfortably afterwards. So here's what is going on. Each Achas min Shebnei Anavim, a woman from the wives of the Bnei Hanavim, those that were involved with Nevuah, saw Elisha v'goymer. She cried out to Elisha, telling him the whole problem that we said. And the Alter Rebbe has a short Maamar, which we will soon bring, that explains over there all the specific matters in that story of that Haftorah in Avodas Hashem. In other words, the Alter Rebbe, like we will see, will take different points of the story and explain what are all these things in the spiritual realm. What are they all about? It'll come on Sif Beis, like we'll have in chapter 2 of this collection. By prefacing, be able to understand how we can derive from stories in the Torah lessons in Avodas Hashem. So the Rebbe introduces something that says in a Maamar of Rebbe Paritcher. And then he says Rebbe Paritcher was a chassid. Still in all, there's a concept, there were elder chassidim. There was Rebbe Paritcher, there was Isaac Hamler, that even though they were chassidim, they also wrote Maamarim. And the Rebbe says that we in one of the footnotes, that we know that chassidim, even though in general they were very careful about not mixing and not learning Maamarim of other Rebbeim or other Chassidism, or even so much of Chassidim, but Rebbe Paritcher's Maamarim was like accepted, and it was taken to be of great value, and Chassidim used to look into them, like the Rebbe says. So there's an introduction that says in the Maamar of Rebbe Paritcher, which can help explain how, in general, the stories of the Torah need to be viewed. And then the Rebbe adds in the parentheses on line 6 that it's not just that we are repeating words of Rebbe Paritcher, but also shekanirim yusad al Maamar Admor Hazaken now. This idea that Rebbe Paritcher is saying about the importance and the value that we place on the stories in the Torah, that, as we will soon learn, is something that's actually based on this Maamar, the Alter Rebbe, that will be quoting in chapter 2 in Ois Beis. Ke'ein Hagdam, he says it as like an introduction to that Maamar of the Alter Rebbe. So he says, Dini Yaduam, known all the stories are in Tanakh. Hagam shahoy kibshutam, though the stories was in the literal sense, ke'ein mikra yotzim de pshuta, because the pasuk does not leave its simple sense. Other people like to take the stories and say, well, Adam Chava didn't really exist, or Bilam didn't really happen to it that way. These are all metaphors, and these are all mishalim for spiritual things. So the Rebbe says, Chas v'shalom. The stories happen. The stories in this physical world, the way a Ben Chamish Lemikra reads them, they occurred. But despite the fact that they occurred in the physical realm, they also have the spiritual component as well. Kol makim, still in all. Lama bachru anavim sipurim elu daika lekosrum b'tanach. Why did the Nevi'im choose specifically these stories to include them in Tanakh? In other words, we're not focusing now on Chamisha Chumshei Torah. We're primarily focusing on the stories that occurred with different Nevi'im that are included in Nevi'im, Ksuvim, and so on. Al-Karchach, we are forced to say, because the story itself is not enough of a reason just because it occurred to include it. But rather, the reason why it was included is because there's much more layers to the story than just the physical event. But rather, because it's hinted in them supernal secrets, and many ways in the service of Hashem. Ad kan agdam Rabbil, up till here is the preface of Rabbil Parish. So in other words, that we know, for example, it's brought down in Gemara that there were much more Nevi'im, much more prophets than we have in the Sifrei Nevi'im. It was like twice as many as Yotzei Mitzrayim, it says, were the amount of prophets. Another 1.2 million Nevi'im throughout Jewish history. And despite the fact that there was 1.2 million Nevi'im throughout Jewish history, we only have recorded, a few tens of Nevi'im are recorded in the whole entire Tanakh. The reason for that is the Gemara says that a nevuah, a prophecy that mattered for all time and all generations, that was included, and that was made part of Tanakh. That which did not matter for all time or all generations, that is not included in Tanakh. So similarly over here, the stories, there were definitely many very interesting stories that happened throughout the Jewish history that Navi and Ksuvim span. And yet, and miraculous stories, we're sure, but they were not included in Tanakh. And therefore, the ones that are included in Tanakh, those are things that have for us lessons in the service of Hashem. Line 13, after the parentheses, moving it's understood, just like the lessons and the directives. That's in the halachas and the dinim of the Torah. They're everlasting hayros in every time and in every place. Like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, that the Torah is everlasting. So even when it says, for example, that when Hashem tells the Jewish people, what does Hashem want from you? Only to fear Him. This wasn't just for the generation, let's say in the Midbar, but it was for all time. So the fact that the Torah is all time is not just about the halachas, but putting on film is not just something that was done then, it's done now. It's keeping Shabbos, it's not just then, it's now as well. Then the Rebbe says a very interesting explanation. He says in the brackets, this is also the explanation of what it says, that the Torah mitzvahs, they are our life. What does it mean, they are our life? So there's a simple meaning and there's a deeper meaning. In them lepter, not only does it mean that this is his vitality, this is his energy, this is what he's invested in, this is what he lives with, that he learns Torah out of passion and excitement and vitality. Additionally, what does it mean, that the Torah affects as the manner of life, how one must live. Meaning, that the life of every Jewish person in every place and in every time, Torah have to be according to the lessons and directives of the Torah. That's what it means that the Torah is everlasting. So one might think that this is referring to specific commands or mitzvahs in the Torah. Comes the Rebbe and says, no, kach, in line 21, gam Torah, also the lessons and directives that are in the stories of the Torah. These are everlasting lessons. He called Torah Achas because the entire Torah is one Torah. It's a whole Torah. The Efshel lahafrit chas v'shalom inyan echad mizullah. So it's impossible to chas v'shalom separate one matter from another. The entire Torah is called Torah, which is lesson, directive, and teaching, and so on. So that means it's not just the parts of Torah that are explicitly, to our mind, understood as directives and lessons and teachings and halachas, is something that is everlasting and applicable to all over all time, but even other parts of the Torah, which seem to only relate events that occurred many years ago, those are also ongoing and everlasting lessons to each and every one of us. Torah Achas, because the entire Torah is one Torah. I said this right. Heaven forbid to separate one thing from another. In the Rambam, like the ruling of the Rambam, someone that says that Torah is not from Hashem. How about if he doesn't deny Torah being divinely given, but he denies one detail? I feel a pasuk echad. How about if he says that the entire Torah is from Hashem, except for one pasuk? How about no? He says every single pasuk is from Hashem, but I feel teva achas. Or he says even one word in the entire 300 plus thousand, not 300,000 words, 300,000 letters. One word in the Torah is not from Hashem. And the Chazal also teach us, and the Rambam says about this, this doesn't make a difference where he chooses to delete that word from. Whether he deletes it from the Aseres HaDibros, from the first of the Aseres HaDibros, I am Hashem your God, or something seemingly as inconsequential as saying that Timnah was a Pelegish, was a concubine over there in the families of Esau. Im Amar, the Rambam said, if a person says, Moshe Rabbeinu said it mepiatzmai on his own, top of page above, even if he agrees that the word that Moshe Rabbeinu said on his own is true and holy, but he says that he does not have the level of holiness like there is in the pasuk Anoich he is denying the entire Torah. And so if he says a similar to this thing, even if he says that one matter in the oral Torah was not God-given, so it's also he's denying Torah. So the Rebbe says, extending that idea to understanding the everlasting lessons of stories in the Torah. If we do not relate to the lessons in the stories of the Torah, has everlasting lessons and directives. It's not just that he's missing out on the particular lessons that he could be deriving from those particular stories in the Torah, which he's denying their everlasting message, but rather he makes it be deficient also the lessons that's in the halachas of the Torah. He makes it even deficient what it says, I am Hashem your God. Meaning, because like we said before, the Torah is one complete whole. And if someone makes a deficiency in one part of the Torah, it makes the entire wholeness of the Torah incomplete. Just to give a silly example, Chassidus, we always say, etzem kasha, teifes mitzaseh at the teifes bekuli. The essence, if you grab onto part of it, you grab onto its entirety. So you could have, let's say, a huge, let's say, table that takes like 2 or 3 people to carry. If you hold even the edge of the table, you're holding the table. And if you have a chip in that table, you have a break in that table, even if it's the edge, even if it's the corner, the entire table is blemished. The entire table is chipped. It's not just that part of the table is chipped and the rest of the table is whole. No, the whole table is not whole anymore. It has a chip in it. The same thing, just to use a silly example, if a person takes away from this everlasting nature of Torah, even in something that one might think is inconsequential, like a story in Torah, so it's really taking away from the everlasting nature, even, and it's making defective and lessening the everlasting nature, even in the halachas and dinim of the Torah. Until I'm your God is also missing and lacking because of it in his world, because he has detracted and taken away from the wholeness of the Torah. The Rebbe gives a different example than what I gave about how a damage in a part is considered a deficiency in the wholeness. For example, if you have a Sefer Torah that's missing one letter, again, we have like over 300,000 letters in the Sefer Torah, it's missing one letter. Raise a poigim, but kashrus called Sefer Torah. So it's not shot that part of the Sefer Torah is not kosher. It's the entire Sefer Torah is not a kosher Sefer Torah. You can't read from it. And perhaps we can extend it even further. It's not just that it's missing that letter. How about if it's just a piece of the letter is missing? It's only a piece of one letter. Still in all, if it's a piece that makes that letter invalid, so then you can't read the entire Sefer Torah. The whole Sefer Torah is not whole and not complete, and you cannot read from it. You cannot use it b'tzibur. The kivin shechelik mesuyim b'Torah ain't a nitzchiatzloi, because since a part of the Torah is not everlasting by him, meaning that he holds that in this time where he lives in Tafshin Pei Beis in 2021, this story has no message for me. So he says, if this story has no message for me in 2021, so therefore, to a certain degree, he is invalidating or distancing himself, even the messages of the Torah for him in 2021 of Anoich Havai Elokech. So, based on this approach, similar to this concerning the story that's related in this Haftarah. Though the story happened in the simple sense, in the literal sense, physically. The noise of the Kakshain Mikriyot in addition to what we said before, that the pasuk doesn't leave its literal sense. So the Navi says that this is what occurred, it actually occurred. There's an additional thing that adds, if you will, if you could say these words, but it adds validity to the event actually occurring. That's not just some metaphor or something. Why? This story, this is one of the 16 miracles that Elisha showed, one of the 16 signs that Elisha showed. What's the significance of the 16 signs? It says that Elisha, who was a disciple of Eliyahu Hanavi, he said he asked Eliyahu Hanavi to be twice as much in spirit as Eliyahu Hanavi was. So the Chazal say, "Mekanat adoyde shmoina moifsim be'Eliyahu sheish Sreil Elisha." From here you derive that since Eliyahu Hanavi had performed 8 miracles that's recorded, so Elisha, who davened to have twice as much of the spirit of Eliyahu Hanavi, so he fulfilled and he did 16 miracles, meaning, and these are one of the 16 miracles that Elisha performed. So therefore, it cannot just be talking about metaphorically, because this is one of those things, that one of those events that indicated that his request was manifested. So back after the brackets, line 22, line 20, from the fact that the story was set in Torah, it's understood that it has a lesson in the service of Hashem. Maybe we could say differently. You know why the story was set in the Torah? Because it had to tell us that Elisha had 16 miracles, therefore he had the request fulfilled. We cannot say the story was set in the Torah only to relate that the request was fulfilled twice as much, that he should be able to have twice as much of the spirit of Eliyahu Navi. For that, it would have been sufficient if the Torah would have just related to us and told us, you know what, Elisha performed 16 miracles. Doesn't have to go into the miracles, or doesn't have to go into the details of the miracle. Since the Torah relates and tells this story, not just it relates the story, but it goes into many details. We must say that the general story in general, in other words, the general part of the story and also the detail of the story, that were set in the Torah, they're everlasting lessons in the service of the Eibush. Before we go on to open it to questions, I wanted to add line in footnote 12. Again, since we've learned this Maamar before, other years that Dvar Malchus has published this, we've learned this before. I want to add at least something new. The Rebbe says at the beginning of our page, he says that whoever says that any part of the Torah doesn't have the level of holiness like Anoich Havai Lekecha, or that Moshe Rabbeinu himself said it, then he is detracting and taking away from the entire Torah. It's like he's denying the entire Torah. So the Rebbe is going to ask that we find a Maamar Chazal that seems to indicate that the whole Chumash Dvarim is something that Moshe Rabbeinu said. How does that fit in with this quote that we brought from the Rambam, that the Rambam says that anyone denies any letter in the Torah was said by the Eibishter is something that is considered denying the whole Torah? So look on the bottom of the page, line 12, Maamar Chazal, line 12, footnote 12. Maamar Chazal shem Mishnah Torah Amrat Moshe Priyatzmoi, that the repeat of the Torah, meaning Chumash Dvarim, which is called Mishnah Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu said it, but from himself. So he says, he brings down, what does it mean he said it from himself? It doesn't mean that he made it up. Harishama b'Sinai. He heard it on Har Sinai. And what does it mean? So if so, what does it mean that he said it himself? So he explains, skip the parentheses to the next line. If so, if the Mishnah Torah he heard on Har Sinai, Chumash Dvarim he heard on Har Sinai, and the first 4 books he heard on Har Sinai, so why do we say that Mishnah Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu said it on his own? Hefresh Rebbe Mishnah Torah, Dvar Malchus, the difference between Chumash Dvarim and the first 4 Sfarim of Bereshit Shmos Vayikra Bamidbar, which Mishnah Torah Nislapsha Basagasi Bruch HaKodesh Eloi. Mishnah Torah was enclosed in Moshe Rabbeinu's comprehension, in his own level of Ruach HaKodesh. And then he says, if you remember in the parentheses on line 4, in the actual text of the Maamar, he says, so too, if someone says on any matter of the Torah, even in the oral Torah that's not from Hashem, he's denying the whole Torah. But the Rebbe says that what took place in Torah Sheba'al Peh is similar, not the exact same way, it still doesn't have the same holiness. Torah Sheba'al Peh does not have the same word for word, letter for letter holiness like the written Torah, but it's in a similar vein to what we just now said, that Mishnah Torah came down from Har Sinai, but it became clothed in Moshe Rabbeinu's mind. So too it's in Torah Sheba'al Peh. Sheba Rambam Sham, like it says over there, that the Rambam mentions over there, that kol chidushei ha'Torah shenizgalu de Talmid Vasek shebechol dor v'dor. All the new and novel interpretations that were revealed through a diligent student in every single generation. Kulam nitnu l'Moshe Sinai. All of them were given to Moshe on Har Sinai. And Dvar Mamish, they are Mamish, the spoken word of Hashem. But the difference between Chamisha Chumshei Torah and Torah Shebal Peh is that it became enclosed and it came out of the mind of the student, but it's not originating from there, it's originating from Hashem's word. Now, let's go back to a part that we skipped. In note 12, there was a parenthesis that began on the first line in note 12 and goes on further in the second line in note 12. It says, Noisef alzeh, shegam pi atzmai de Moshe haya beruach hakodesh. That which the Chazal say, that it came out of himself, it was said by Moshe himself, Chumash Dvarim, as opposed to the first four Chumashim, even that was with Ruach HaKodesh. So then there's a star, an asterisk on the bottom of the page that elaborates on that. What he heard on Har Sinai, like the rest of the Torah, that's even higher than the level of Ruach HaKodesh. There's a level of Ruach HaKodesh, but that's not the ultimate level. What was heard on Har Sinai is beyond the level of Ruach HaKodesh. The first four Sfarim of Chamisha Chumshei Torah, they remained in their aloof and exalted state, and they retained their higher than Ruach HaKodesh state, and did not become enclosed in the Ruach HaKodesh of Moshe Rebbe. Masha'enki Sefer Mishnah Torah, as opposed to Chumash Dvarim did become enclosed in the Ruach HaKodesh of Moshe Rebbe. So when we say it became enclosed in the mind of Moshe, it doesn't mean the mind of Moshe as it's a human mind, but it became enclosed in that lower level, which is still relates to Moshe, but Moshe Rabbeinu's Ruach HaKodesh. So that's what it means, the difference between the four Sfarim, and it says that the fifth Sefer that Moshe Rabbeinu himself said it. Any questions?
Do we mean that Moshe Rabbeinu was like, he related more, like he understood the Sefer Devarim more than the rest?
It became his more. It was something that related. I don't think the point is understanding, which is intellectual.
No, I mean relating to it more, like it became more part of it.
As we often explain, that the difference between the first four Sfarim and the fifth is that Moshe Rabbeinu spoke in first person. When in Chumash Dvarim, Moshe Rabbeinu spoke saying, I did this, I did that, I asked Hashem, Vo'es Chanon el Hashem, and I went up on the mountain and I did so and so. The majority of the time, throughout Chumash Dvarim, it speaks in first person, Moshe Rabbeinu relating the events as he experienced it, if you will. Whereas in the first four Sfarim, it speaks about, like the Ramban, I think, uses the term Shlishi HaMedaber. Someone else is saying that there was Hashem and there was Moshe, and Hashem told Moshe Leimer. So it's not Moshe Rabbeinu doing the speaking. It's Moshe Rabbeinu recording what this third party, in other words, the Eibishter higher in the worlds, is relating in the Torah.
Okay.
I have a question on the timing. So on the first four books, part of it happens, part of the story is after Har Sinai. So how he got the whole story?
There's different opinions about that. If you want, I'll send you a link to an article on Chabad.org that speaks about the different opinions about if the Torah was given in its entirety initially, was given hidden, was it given concealed, and how did Moshe Rabbeinu not be aware of certain events that were going to happen, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, we'll stop over here. Take care, everybody.